See, okay. So welcome to my channel and the first of a hopefully new series of Writers Talks, in which I will be talking with a writers of choice. In this case, it's Baz Greenland. No script, no set questions, just two writers talking about what they love to do. So, hello, Baz.
Oh, good to be here.
Welcome to my cyber room. Bit of introduction. Baz has been part-time author, I suppose, like we all are, really, let's be honest. We've all got jobs for a few years now. Is that right?
Yeah, first thing published Canning Jar was 2019, my first short story then, yeah.
Which have been in this book.
The Laughing Gnome, that's the one, yeah. The dinner party is my...
I prepared. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did we not start work on the novel before this?
We did actually, yeah. So we talked, I think, probably back in 2018.
In this one.
That's the one, yeah. So yeah, we started talking about what came forward to the past back in 2018, and you asked me to kind of collaborate with you on that book, and then you had the Laughing Gnome come out, and I thought it'd be good to actually get a short story out before my first novel. So yeah, it was a Laughing Gnome was the first thing I. Yeah,
because Laughing Gnome, the dinner party is kind of a setup, isn't it? In a sense,
very much so. I feel like I've these characters that I've written for it sets up nicely, and it sets up a couple of references to what happens in Forward to the Past. So yeah, I like that continuity of it,
which of course gets changed by Forward to the Past, as I recall.
Yeah, yes.
So that's part of it. I did have an idea, right, and maybe one day I'll get you to do this: is to rewrite the dinner party. But without the added stuff from the future bit, just from the point of view of the characters involved, but reflecting the slightly altered reality to see how much it might have shifted and changed the dynamics of that story.
Quite possibly,
I think that might be kind of interesting as a writer.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Trying. I mean, that's it. I was setting a history and then rewriting it, knowing that history that was set up was being rewritten. So yeah, it'd be quite fun to kind of do an alternate take and the multiverse of the dinner party.
Yeah, it could be. It could be quite interesting. So, since we're to talk about writing, tell me what. I say I'm not going to ask you questions, but obviously we've got to get a conversation going. Why? What got you into writing anyway?
Oh, that's a long story, really. So,
we've only got half an hour, so don't get.
Yeah, I'll be brief. So basically, I've always loved reading, always loved writing, and when I was 10, I saw the animated Lord of the Rings on TV. Fell in love with it. Went and read the books. Went to the library every week, getting more and more books from the library and getting into reading. And so when I was about 10, I wrote my first fantasy epic, The Crystallian. I wrote about 10 chapters of this big epic novel when I was 10 years old, and then lost it in the move. And so I always wanted to write. So I always wanted, and I've been writing on and off since I was 10, basically. I've written kind of what became 3 fantasy novels, which I finished at university. I had some agents read them back in, this is 20 years ago now. Never got any further than agents reading them. It's hard to get into writing, and then tried some new stuff. Met with a couple of authors, tried some stuff out. I never really got anywhere. I was always trying to write new stuff, and I've probably written about 5 novels, but never actually got anywhere with them. I always either life got in the way, or when I approached agents, I got as far as agents reading some of my books, and that was it. I never really got any further than that. So it was always hard.
You tried to get me into one of them.
Yeah, there was one. There was one.
They tried to get me like, come on, fight it.
Well, that's it. I obviously met you several years ago, and we both kind of fell in love. I shared love of Doctor Who and writing and reading and everything else as well. And yeah, I think that's kind of probably where I started to kind of. So look, I'm a writer as well. I don't just love Doctor Who. I love to write, and I put some stuff your way, and never kind of really got anywhere. I think I even wrote a short story for you that kind of got put in the back burner. It was a Brigadier Bentley kind of battlefield era story.
I seem to recall. I'm pretty sure it had something to do with Silurians originally.
It was initially, and then I did, and I tweaked it around.
Obviously,
yeah. So I think you'd seen some. Obviously, I think I'd pitched my novel Goblin at the time, and then I'd written a couple of kind of short story ideas for you as well. So I guess you'd seen some of my work before. It wasn't just like, oh, go and co-write a novel with me. You'd seen some of my writing first.
Just go in, yeah. Just dive in, yeah.
Yeah. But no, I was always hugely appreciative because I think you understood. You know, I'm 40 now, and
so young.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, so 30 years of my life trying to write and get published and get to that point, and it's, you know, it's meant a lot for so long. So the fact that you then actually said, okay, let's do this together was that lucky break for me. Absolutely. You know, obviously I proved myself having done some writing for you, but it was that lucky break as well. And I love it.
And I mean, I only know so much. Have you written anything outside of the Lethbridge-Stewart universe yet, like published wise, or
no? I've it's
Unit obviously is technically part of the same thing, but you know.
Yeah. So as of all the .2 universe and spin-off stuff from Candy Jar, I've had 2 short stories and a novel published, and some other stuff that is not been announced, but it's all within that kind of universe.
Be?
There's a couple of things, but yeah,
we can talk about these things, but not too specifically. Obviously, we don't do too much. But I know you're working on a novel, or rewritten or rewritten. Or both.
It's done. It's under review now.
Or you're rewriting it now?
I've rewritten it, so it kind of is done and ready and waiting on stuff. So yeah, which is my second novel. So that's out there now. At some point in the future, to be printed.
Oh God, I think maybe this year. It may well be. I mean, I'm not in charge of this particular range, but
I'm hopeful. I know there's stuff around it that's connected to it that has started to get some momentum. Yeah. So I'm hopeful for this year.
Obviously, you've got a short story which will be this year, definitely, probably in the next couple of months, all things being equal, which you've just written. Actually, you wrote it originally a little while ago.
I did.
Like end of last year, I think.
I think it was, yeah.
And then, of course, I got back to you and said, cool, but not quite the right angle.
Yeah. I'm a lot happy with the new version.
I think the new version works a lot better too, and people can read that very soon in Lineage, the paperback version, in case you're wondering. Because this goes out Saturday, which is only tomorrow, and we'll be announcing it properly next week anyway, so it's not that big deal. How do you actually approach writing? Because I know how I do, and I'm sure I'll be talking about that a lot over the coming videos, so I'm not going to hog the limelight even. So how do you approach writing? I mean, that's a vague question, I know.
It's a very broad question. I think it depends. I think with the work I've done a lot of historical based stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, both short stories and Forward to the Past, all set in the past. So I've done a lot of kind of research into. I want to kind of get my facts right. Obviously, it's fiction, but I'm basing it in kind of the real past to an extent. So I've done my research for Forward to the Past, for example. I spent quite a long time I knew I was looking at late 19th century, and it could potentially be anywhere in the world. So I just looked for interesting ideas and looked at historical events and
my desk. Sorry, carry on.
And yeah, just spent quite a long time researching, get the ideas right. And I set on the Palais Garnier disaster in 1896 in Paris, and I thought, that's an interesting kind of angle to go from. Hence, Paris was mentioned in the dinner party. So I spent a lot of research on that as well, and just reading a lot of stuff. I read a lot of the Lethbridge-Stewart novels, and just trying to get my head around the characters, because my knowledge really came from TV before then. So understanding what's come before. So it's a lot of research and reading. I think it's a lot of it. Be a bit patient. I could just launch straight in, but actually, and I've done that in the past, my own personal stuff, I've come up with ideas and launched straight in. And a lot of writing for me is just kind of to see how it flows. And once I get a basic concept, I go into, but
people often
some preparation.
Yeah, I think people often say I don't think this is really strictly true, but there's 2 types of writing. There's what's called a pantser, where you literally write by the seat of your pants. So you're literally making up as you go along, which we all do to a point, obviously.
Yeah, we absolutely.
Or you've got those who literally intricately plot things out and then write.
Yeah.
I tend to be in the middle, generally.
I would say Yeah, I'm the same. I think I had an idea of the setting, the historical basis, looked at other stories before. Obviously, before with the past, I mean, the first two books had come up by that point, so I was able to start reading the build up to the Bloodline series as well. And I think, so there is a lot of preparation. There's like a rough, breakdown of what's going to happen, but it's very broad and high level. And then I think when you start writing, it changes anyway. You go, okay, well, I think roughly I'm going to hear, and things change. And I think the one thing I love about writing is if the characters are good enough and the writing story is good enough, then they kind of take over a little bit as well. And
I think that's true. I don't think that's a big head. I think
if
you develop the character properly, they will determine how the plot's going to go.
Absolutely. So I found, okay, in these next 3 or 4 chapters, this is roughly going to happen with these characters. And that's basically like 2 or 3 lines I've got. I know actually there's this maybe event that might have happened, or this situation, and maybe want to kind of draw upon. Apart from that, it's like off I go. So it's I kind of like you just kind of let it flow and see, roughly. I think being quite methodical, not writing a 1,000-page book is the big fact is I've just finished reading a 1,000-page novel, which I loved, but it's big, so sometimes it's good to have focus, and
it could take a good few months.
It did for me.
Well, see, myself, when one thing I don't like writing, and I'm obviously in a good position because I tend to be writing in LS first, so I don't have to worry about doing outlines for myself, which is good because I don't like writing outlines, because I find outlines a good jumping off point, but inevitably they're not really how the book or play or whatever is going to become. The way I tend to approach is more a case of, I know roughly where I'm going, I know where the story is, I know where the story's going, and then I'll just dive in. And then after I'm about 2 or 3 chapters in, then I start sort of planning the chapters out ahead of the next chapter. So I like what you do, like you say, you've got like a couple of lines of, right, this is where it's going to go next. I tend to right, next chapter, this scene, and that's what I need next. So I'll work on that while I'm planning the next chapter. So like I said, I do a bit of pantsing, a bit of plotting as well.
Yeah.
What's your view on outlines? Because I'm sure generally authors don't seem to like outlines, but I'm pretty sure there's got to be some that actually think they're amazing. I suspect you're not one of them.
No, I don't. I've pitched stuff before, and I've written pitches for yourself, other people. I was pitching some audio dramas and didn't get anywhere, and they're really hard. What I find really hard, particularly with pitch right in a paragraph, how to pitch the whole story and get the essence of what the story is in a few lines. I find really hard, because you want to get it all out. This is what's going to happen, and this is what it's going to be like, and how it's going to feel like, and what the character's going to do, and you're going to like this because of this situation or this character, and you can't do that in basically 1 or 2 paragraphs. I think a bit more breakdown helps, but it's very clinical. I think I still find it very clinical and very hard to kind of distill the magic of it and what the characters are feeling and how it's going to come to life.
I got that recently with an outline I wrote, which I can't really say what it is yet. I think I might have mentioned it to you before, because it's not been contracted, and obviously can't say anything until things are signed and whatnot. But the idea came fairly easy. Wrote the outline. It was pretty straightforward, I thought. But like you say, before I send it off, I'm looking through it. I'm thinking it's tough because the nuance, as you say, the magic, the spark, it's really hard to convey that in what's basically 2 pages. What will come in script form, is a clue, will become about 20 pages. Yeah. It's like, how do you convey all of that, even the little scenes? Because I remember when I did Secret of Death Zen, for instance, I had a line in there about the Doctor doing his passive resistance thing, and one of the producers was like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "Well, you know what it means, but I know what I'm talking about, because the first Doctor, he has a certain way of resisting people without going to violence necessarily." I knew exactly what it meant, but conveying that, because I think, I could convey that within the outline, but that would take about quite a few lines, which frankly I need to squeeze it all into these couple of pages. But yeah, it's a weird thing trying to convey the real deep elements of a story in such a short span of time.
Yeah.
And we'll get lots of beeps, so ignore them. That's people responding to my Facebook post of it earlier. But anyway, yes, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you want to convey what excites you about writing the story, what excites you about the characters, or where the story is going to go, and it comes, gosh, you've got to get all the key points across, so it becomes very, very clinical. So I think it's a real hard balancing act to kind of convey a bit of that magic while telling very succinctly what it's going to be about.
Agreed. How do you approach characters then? Because I know some people, from reading and talking to people, not reading people, that'd be weird. When they tend to have characters with very strict types and manners and attributes and whatnot. I personally, you've read my stuff, I tend to be very much of the opinion that, as just like real people, nobody fits into one box.
Yeah.
And I try with characters that, they got to be fluid in the sense that, they got to be real, they've got to be organic and fluid. They can't be, they'll only react in this particular way. They only respond to this kind of, whereas people don't. So I don't know, how do you approach characters?
It's an interesting one, because you probably want to get some key facets and attributes about the character, things their history or their likes or how they speak or how they act. And I think you probably have 5 things to describe this character. I kind of have that in my head as a starting point, but I think it's one that, as you write in the characters, it kind of comes to life as well. Yeah. I think writing as a Lethbridge-Stewart senior, so the Brigadier's grandfather, sort of grandfather. It's all complicated, isn't it? So writing him, he kind of, when I started writing him, I'd had the knowledge of the stuff from the other books, but he was much older, so he's much younger. It was kind of like my 19th century James Bond type character that I've kind of created for him, which is a little bit different to how he is later.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like I need the basics, but I didn't really know kind of who he was until I started writing for him. So I had an idea of the basics, but I had to kind of fill him out as I fill the character out as I wrote the character. And I guess the same with like Lillian as well. And I've now written Lillian more than once. I feel like I'm getting the sense of the Brigadier's grandmother, who started as Granny McDougall in a Big Finish story, or it was another story. And I've kind of feel like I've fleshed out Lillian, who Lillian is as well. But
because Lillian only both Lillian and Alistair appeared in, I think, a couple of short stories before yours, and like really minor appearances too. Really.
Yeah,
Lillian in particular has appeared before you did your dinner party, I think, once, and maybe that was like a line or two. She was a bit of a socialite in a young age, and she's gone back into that in her dotage, now that they've inherited the estate and all that stuff. Yeah. So you had a very vague thing to pull from.
Yeah.
Which, I think sometimes can be good when you're writing for characters that already exist, is that if they've only been kind of, they only got vague details about them, it gives you much freer hand. Whereas if, like, say, characters that existed for like 50 odd years, like the Brigadier, I imagine that on some level might be a bit more constricting.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, I got to write for Anne and the alternate version of Alice, who's Archie, and I like Archie. I like Archie a lot, and I love the novel you wrote with Tim as well. And I read that. I think it hadn't come up, but you sent me the copy of that before it'd been printed, so I could read over it before. It very heavily influenced what I was doing as well, and it is a little bit harder because particularly with Archie, because even though he was a different version, he still is a legacy character. So it's kind of like trying to find that your stamp of writing for the character without kind of detracting too far as well. So that was
creating alternative versions of an existing character is certainly a different challenge.
Yeah,
because you still want them to feel like the character that people know.
That was it. Yeah,
but different enough that you can see that their life has taken a slightly different path rather. So I can. Of course, I dumped that right on you because originally correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be, because we went through a few alterations. That wasn't it actually going to be Alistair originally?
I think Alistair was actually out the whole thing. I think he was with
He was always
Claude.
out.
I think it was going to be. I think we had H.G. Wells in there at one point. I had a whole.
We did. We was going to be Wells, Travers, George, and Eileen, wasn't it?
That was it. Yeah, and Eileen, and then George. Yeah. So it did change. And we said, let's put Archie in. It's like, okay, well, I'm actually writing for the character, which was fun to write. It depends. Like Anne, for example, obviously. The Lethbridge-Stewart novels, I've really fleshed out the amazing character. I love Anne Tabitch. She's an amazing character. She was brilliant, so good in Web of Fear. Yeah, that line, when I grew up, I want to be a scientist, so I became one. It's just a perfect line.
It says everything you need to know about
exactly.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of fun writing for Anne, but actually making it a bit more, because you could write her as very bright but very sassy and kind of keep her at that level. But there's a lot of vulnerability into her, in particularly obviously what happens in the previous Bloodlines book, which I drew upon it in mine. So I was able to have fun with her, like her going undercover, which I loved and going undercover on this mission, which was great fun.
Well, I love that stuff where she's the seduction of
Antoine. Of Antoine.
And I think,
it was.
It's not right to post, somebody in front of you, but I still think that's one of my favorite scenes I've read in a long time.
Oh, thank you.
Every time I read them, but it's nice because it echoed. There was a similar thing happened, or did it happen after? I can't recall now, but there was another similar sort of instant in either previous or the next book, I can't remember, but it was a nice unintentional echo, which, I suppose that's Bloodlines, and that's the whole point of Bloodlines, intentionally or not. Moving on from Lethbridge-Stewart a little bit, because otherwise we could just be talking about the Brigadier. And we're talking about writing here, not specifically the Brigadier. Unfortunately, I've got authors lined up who are not connected to the Lethbridge-Stewart verse at all, because it'd be nice to get different, otherwise it could just be me and whoever talking about stuff.
I'm still a bit of a newbie to this, aren't I, in terms of actually being published. So I mean,
my world, I'll interview in a couple of years. You'll be like, well, actually, I've got a few new novels now. Hey, you got to live in hope, man. What was I going to say? I can't remember. This will happen.
Moving away from Lethbridge-Stewart.
Yeah. What inspires you as a writer? Says he who's not going to ask questions, but you can ask me.
I mean, good writing inspires me. I mean, Lord of the Rings inspired me to start writing when I was 10. I know. That's my where I.
You say good writing.
Yeah. Sorry, phone. But I think reading a good book and just falling in love with the character and falling in love with the character and the style of writing and just being absorbed in that world is what inspires me. Seeing good characters, these amazing worlds, and really gripping stories, like a book you can't put down, inspires me. So that's maybe the way you learn by reading. And I think for me as a writer, I think it's just what inspires me is I love writing characters. I love getting into their heads and exploring their journeys, and really just getting to have fun with it and seeing where it takes me, because I think that's it. Like we said before, it's when you're really in the flow of writing, it kind of takes you on a journey as much as the reader. You just go, okay, well, where's this going? I'm going to write this. Well, that's really good. I'll write this, and that leads sparks something else in your head, and you just keep writing. I think at a certain point, that summary doesn't get completely dropped, but you kind of put it aside a bit, and you just have fun writing and seeing these characters, having their characters interact and just have fun and go, oh, that's good. And, and when things come together and you've been waiting for it. And briefly the Lethbridge-Stewart stuff, but that moment when Alistair and Lillian meet, I was like, I've got there. It's great. I finally got to that point in the book, and it's great. So when it all comes together and you go, that I really like how that turned out. And these characters took me on a journey as well.
It's interesting, that point about it's nice to get to that big moment. And I find I've seen it a lot in modern writing that some authors do seem to be in a rush to get to that moment. And you can tell. I mean, to use Picard for a good example, the current series seems to be just constantly rushing to get to the next moment. It's almost like the author's like, oh, I've got this great idea, I need to get to it. So we'll just put loads of nonsense in the way in the middle. But yeah. Question. It's kind of about writing, sort of.
Yeah.
Why, what, or why, I don't know. Is it about Lord of the Rings that you think so? Because obviously you said you saw the animated thing, that's what got you interested, but I've read the book since.
I mean,
what please convince me.
Fantasy my bag. Fantasy is my comfort food. It's my comfort reading.
Okay,
I love fantasy.
Fan, but I like
huge. I'm a huge fantasy fan, and I think it's just being absorbed in that world and the stories. And I know it's probably harder for someone to get into now. Like if I read Dune a couple of years ago before the movie came out, and I appreciate this. I bought
it recently, but I still haven't read it.
I found it really hard going. The world building was amazing, and I love the film. I think the film did a really good job, but it was really hard to kind of get into it. And I imagine people going to Lord of the Rings now will find that as well, because there'll be some elements of things have dated, and the context about when it was written as well, the lack of female characters. And I get all that. I think it's just the world building and that the epic adventure nature of it all, and just being lost in that world. And it's, if I read Lord of the Rings now for the first time, would it be my favorite? Possibly not. Apart from me, it's that kind of that's me, going from that kind of childhood reading. When I started reading Lord of the Rings, I suddenly was going to the young adult section as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and getting all these books every week, new book after new book. And it kind of woke and sunk me as a reader, but also that's when I started writing. I'd done stuff when I was writing. I wrote a book called Susan and the Bear when I was 5. I illustrated it. I remember it very vividly. So I was writing before then, but I read Lord of the Rings. I was reading all these big high fantasy, and I sat down at 10 years old and started writing my own fantasy epic novel. And that's kind of what really got me started. So that's why it's special for me.
Okay,
because it's that spark in kind of where I came as a
reader. I'm sure I've said this to you before. I may have. I think I probably have. Or maybe I avoid Lord of the Rings as possible. I find Lord of the Rings too densely written in that, and I think this bears out that he describes everything in such detail that every reader gets exactly the same picture, which maybe that was his intent.
Yeah.
Because I always remind myself of a story that Gary Russell told me when he did the Art of Lord of the Rings books. He said to me that he got a lot of backlash because he wasn't a fan of Lord of the Rings.
Right.
But he was just looking at, that's good art. I like it. I don't care if that really echoes what's in the book. But I do know, like when the films come out, for instance, pretty much universally, any fan of Lord of the Rings who watched those goes, that's exactly as I imagined it.
Yeah, I agree.
Because the book is so densely written, there's no other way to imagine it, which to me, I think is a failure of writing. Is that, our job as writers, this is just for me, obviously, I'm not saying that everybody's the same clearly. Our job is to guide people with pointers to say, right, this is a detail, fill the rest of it in yourself. So I remember when you've obviously heard of my book Seeker, I had a friend of mine, she had read every draft of the book, right? And then when it finally got published, on the original cover, there was this woman in the background with red hair. And she's like, who's that supposed to be? I'm like, that's Lily. Lillian, hey. So some names just keep returning. And I'm like, Lillian, she goes, but I always imagined her with black hair. It's like, she's always had red hair. Every draft you've read, she's always had red hair because it's an important thing later in the series, which I never got to. But because in her head, she painted her own picture, and I find it interesting. And that's probably why I can't get into Lord of the Rings, because it's so densely written that it squashes the imagination of the reader, I think.
I think it's a balance now. I'm a very descriptive reader. You can probably tell when I write. I write and then I cut, because I write so much that I get lost in the world, and I embellish the world, and sometimes I write like, cut that's a bit too much, cut it back, and maybe I've got that from going way back to Lord of the Rings. I don't know, because I get so engrossed in this world that actually it depends. I've recently read a fantasy series called by Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind, and which is an amazing book, and I've read the sequel as well. And it's very, very, very descriptive. But actually, I think as you say, there's a lot where you can bring your own imagination to it. I love getting lost in the world. I think Lord of the Rings really gives a really vivid idea of what the world is. I find maybe as a kid I find particularly exciting, and that's why I'll always love it. But it's I don't know. I think description can be good because sometimes when it's a little bit broad, I think sometimes it's like I can't get a sense of what things are. And obviously, I know the reader has to bring something to it, and the reader will, bring their imagination to it. And
okay,
I know some people
time here.
won't know. Yeah,
sorry,
some people want it to
cut you off, but we've got 40 seconds left before we make
okay.
You don't want to get cut off like midstream. So very quickly, what are you reading at the moment?
I'm just going back to the Wheel of Time series. My fantasy is my comfort food, so I'm on the second book of that.
Something Jordan something.
Robert Jordan. Yeah, so I've just started doing books.
I had a vague knowledge of that. Okay, cool. Well, as I say, we're nearing the end, so we don't want to be cut off mid-flow, and soon we'll get this finessed. Great chat. Hopefully, everybody got some interesting insight into our crazy minds. I'll maybe invite you back again another time once you've written a bit more, because as you said, you've got a few more books out yet. So, see, timer. So, we'll catch base soon, and I'll be back next week with somebody else. Until then, thank you, Baz, and goodbye, everybody.